Good afternoon. On behalf of the Northeast Conference, I would like to welcome you to our Fall and Winter Virtual Workshop Series. This series has been generously sponsored by Wayside Publishing. Please visit waysidepublishing.com for more information about how Wayside can assist with your remote teaching and learning needs. My name is Mike Bogdan, NECFL past chair, and I'll be hosting this afternoon's workshop along with Vice Chair Margarita Dempsey as co-host. We are grateful to our presenter, Leslie Grahn, for offering us her time and expertise. Today's workshop, It's All About Context, will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be posted to our website as soon as possible. The workshop is scheduled to last 1 hour with 45 to 50 minutes devoted to the presentation. The remaining time will serve as question and answer with the presenter to answer your questions. Attendees are encouraged to submit questions during the workshop using the chat box. In the event of technical difficulties, please try to reconnect. If the problem is on our end, we will email all attendees with further instructions when available. And now let me take this opportunity to introduce you to our presenter. Leslie has 27 years of language teaching experience at the middle and high school levels, and 12 years of experience at the central office level, most recently as coordinator of world languages for the Howard County Public School System in Maryland. Leslie is a frequent presenter at conferences specializing in best practices. She curates and creates resources to support language teaching and learning and shares them through her website, groddenforlang.com, and on Pinterest. Leslie is the co-author of The Keys to Strategies for Language Instruction and has served on the boards of NECFL, NADFL, and ACFL. Leslie, thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. Welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, everybody, and happy, what are we, Tuesday afternoon, right? Oh my goodness, and you're right coming up on break, and so good for you. Give yourself a pat on the back that you are still doing professional learning in December. Thank you so much for being here. So our topic for our hour together is about context. How are we contextualizing the lesson tasks that we're doing with our students, with the goal, obviously, of moving students along the proficiency continuum. Thank you for that introduction, Michael, and we'll get started. So we just have a little bit of time together this afternoon, and so I have 3 big ideas on what I'd like us to be able to accomplish. One is to deepen your understanding about Generation Z, who are the learners who are sitting in our classrooms right now. We're going to practice enriching some unit themes to make them more relevant and contextualized for our learners. And then we're going to look at some ways we can also provide context for different types of lesson tasks. All righty, come on now. All right, so what I'd love to do is do a real quick check-in with you and see how you're doing. And so I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What are you looking forward to right now? And I'm predicting that I get a whole lot of answers about winter break. But anyway, what are you most looking forward to right now? So let's start off with this positive note of what's coming up in your life that you're looking forward to. And I'll ask Michael or Margarita to kind of share some of the ideas that are coming through the chat for us.
Okay. New babies, seeing
Ooh.
family, anniversary vacations, learning with Leslie.
Aww.
Holidays, family, peace, happiness, free time, new techniques, compelling lessons,
All right.
snow, skiing.
Snow, all right.
There you go.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing. And this is an example of what we need to take the time to check in with each other and make sure that we're okay. And everything isn't always about work, but it's also about how we're feeling and feeling supported by those around us. So thank you for sharing, those of you who did. So what I want to start out with is this little visual. And I want you to think about how many of your students whose faces you looked into today were saying these things in their minds, right? So they're saying, how am I actually going to use this stuff that I'm learning? And how does this connect with me? Right? So how is this real world for me? So I want us to really be able to put our learners front and center right now and think about, how is it meaningful to them? How is what we're doing real world and contextualized for them? And so I want us to really start out by thinking about, well, why is context important to Generation Z? And so this is one of the infographics I love using when we talk about Generation Z learners. By the way, if you teach elementary level, you're just about to receive the next generation, which they're calling Generation Alpha, right? And so that's the next generation after Z, who are slowly making their way up into the schools. And so what we know about our Generation Z learners is their social circle is global. It's not local. And so it's important to understand that they're looking at the real world. They're looking at accessing information anywhere, anytime, right? 24/7. They want to connect, collaborate, and share with each other and with others out there, even people who aren't in the room with them, even people that they may not know, right? And so I really want us to think about our learners and why context matters to them. So we know Generation Z want to change the world. So am I presenting topics to my Generation Z learners, to my language learners, that have something to do with a real world purpose? Like, how can I make a difference through what I'm creating? So a presentational product or performance I'm creating at the end of a unit, how is that changing something? How is that making things different? Notice in the third bullet that Generation Z is empathetic. They care about what's happening to other people in the world, right? And they're very self-aware. They're aware of themselves, and they want to make a difference out there in the world. I love this one. iGeners would take a 10 to 20% pay cut to work for a company that has a mission they care about. They are globally conscious. So how are we tapping into that? They want to be involved in the global community. They seek learning for personal interests. So remember back to my little girl with her bubbles above her. How is this going to connect with me? And they want to participate in real world action and problem solving. So when we talk about context, in tandem with that, we need to talk about relevance. So how relevant is what we're teaching to our students? And so I have a nice little formula here for you. Relevance is the perception that something is not only interesting, but it's also worth knowing. So that's our little formula, that if it's relevant to me, I'm interested in it. And I also feel like it's worth knowing. There's value to what I'm learning. And we know that when students make that personal connection with material, they actually engage with it. When they don't have a connection, notice it says they disengage, quickly forget, and lose the motivation to try. And this is from neuroscience, right? And so that we know that if they don't make that connection, if it's not relevant and contextualized, they don't even remember it. When our students are looking for relevance in their learning, they're looking for two kinds of relevance. They're looking for personal relevance. So how does this relate directly to my personal aspirations, my interests, right? My motivation to learn? How does it relate to me as an individual? And then they're looking for life relevance, which is the bigger picture. And that's, how is it connected to real world issues and problems and give me the skills or information I need to make a difference? And so when you think about the lessons you're creating, think about relevance on two levels. And many of us do a lot of connecting with students personally. So we try to make a lot of personal connection. So that's that personal relevance. How much are we paying attention to the life relevance? How is this going to help me one day in my career? How is this going to help me one day as I move forward in my education? So if you don't know about this, this is a great practitioner brief that came out from Cal in August. And it actually came out of the NACESFL, which is the state supervisors group, conference that they had last year, not this year, but the year before, where they had a panel of students. They were high school language students. And they ask them questions about what do they like most about learning? What helps them learn the most? And so here are some of the recommendations that came out of it. And I want you to notice where context and relevance come through. Students who were interviewed for that panel said, I want to connect with the world through video pals and e-pals. I want to do like virtual tours of places in the target language country. I want to have weekly conversations with native speakers. I want to have real life scenarios. And then notice the last bullet says they appreciated that their teachers and the activities were enjoyable, especially tasks that help them make a connection with others and increase their opportunities for communication. This is right out of our customers' mouths, right? These are our clients. This is who we're serving and our students. And this is what they're telling us about what they're seeking. Now, they also told us what keeps them from learning. So within that brief, they talk about what hinders their language learning. Discrete grammar tasks that feels like constant correction. That inhibits my progress. And many traditional practices are unmotivated. Students often cited arbitrarily assigned vocabulary as having little practical use for them beyond practice at memorization. And so this is, again, right out of our students' mouths. What are we doing that is hindering them learning language? And then what are they recommending for us to do to increase it or engage them more in the language learning? So now that I did that little segment, I want you to stop for a second and think about, well, now that we've talked a little bit about Generation Z, what are the implications to teaching and learning? What do I need to think about? What do I need to consider if I'm thinking about my Generation Z learners? So again, if you'd like to share something in the chat, I would love to hear from you. What are the implications of digging into who our Generation Z learners are and what they're looking for? And again, I'll ask Michael and Margarita to help me out.
All right, we'll give people a moment to think of their ideas and put in the chat. Social justice themes was shared by Charlotte.
And that's something kids care about, right? And so we've got to tap into that.
Connecting with the local community, leadership, intercultural learning, another community engagement. Real life encounters. Wait a few more seconds if anyone else wants to contribute. Taking action.
So if you go on to my Pinterest boards, I have a whole board on Generation Z. If you want to take a look at some more background information that's been collected around them to know what our students are looking for, particularly in learning settings. Okay, how often are we asking students what interests them about unit themes? So when I begin a theme and I say, we're going to get ready to start a unit on the environment, what interests you about the environment? Right? Most times, if we have thematic units in our curriculum, they're very big ideas, right? The essential questions are very open-ended. And so lots of sub-themes can come through there, right? They're not so specific that it narrows you down into a little tunnel. Instead, they're quite wide. And so how often are we asking students, well, what do you want to talk about? So for example, I know this is going to shock some people, but if you ask students, we're going to talk about school. What do you want to be able to talk about having to do with school? Sadly, they are not going to say, I want to know how to say all of my school supplies, even though that's what we teach them, right? And so we want to really tap into that. What do you want to talk about? And so on the screen here are two examples of a good old strategy that's been around for decades called KWL, where I start out with the theme and I say, what do you already know about this theme related to the target language and the target culture? What do you want to know? And then we come back at the end and we reflect on what did I learn? And on this slide in particular, I'm showing you a version in French and German to show you that these types of tools are out there in the target language. So we do not have to revert to English to talk about those things. So think about ways that when you start your next unit, you can say to students, so what do you want to know about this unit we're about to think? Think about this essential question. What does that make you think about? So let's pretend that we're doing a unit on food. So that's a very typical level 1, level 2-ish kind of unit. What sub-themes might pop up for students when I say to them, okay, we're going to start a food unit. What do you want to talk about? So go in the chat for me and tell me, what do you think they're going to say when you say, we're going to talk about food? What do you want to know about food? What do you want to talk about? What do you think they're going to say?
Okay, Leslie, I see food trucks.
Oh, that's a good one.
Dietary restrictions, eating, likes and dislikes of food, allergies, online food apps, having a class party, favorite food, junk food, vegetarianism, DoorDash, desserts, hunger, types of food, quite a variety.
Awesome. Love it. And so here are just some ideas I generated. Some of you came up with this. Veganism, food waste. Notice how much food is wasted. Food that gets thrown away from groceries, food that gets thrown away from restaurants. What does what can we do about food waste? And by the way, I have a whole Pinterest board on that if you're interested in digging into that. Fast food, I heard you say. Vegetarianism, I heard you say. Hunger. Are we talking about people who live in food deserts, who have a hard time finding healthy food to eat? Are we talking about the issue of hunger when we talk about food? Right. And so again, think about that whole social justice side. And then are some people practicing meatless Mondays, for example, where we don't eat meat once a week intentionally? That's something that could be part of your students' everyday lives. And so allow them to kind of generate these ideas, because it'll give you ideas about how to hook them in terms of motivation and engagement. So here are some more ideas that I came up with. I took really typical novice themes on the left-hand side of the slide on the chart. And then I thought about how can I make it real world? And what happens with level 1 is that if you're teaching 9th graders who are 15, we're teaching them these very rudimentary kind of vocabulary sets. And I want us to think about how can I make that a little bit more interesting. So this chart actually is the result of me working with some of my level 1 teachers. And we were trying to think about how can we make the level 1 curriculum more real world and more relevant to them. So as we talk about personal descriptions, which of course is, I'm tall, I have brown hair, that kind of stuff. Am I also talking about identity and diversity? Am I talking about uniqueness and how I'm different than you? And that's a good thing. Diversity is a plus in our classroom. And I have different strengths and talents from you, and that's all good, right? And so thinking about that. I have a level 1 teacher in middle school who talks about adoption when she talks about family, because she has many students who want to talk about that. There's the food one. We could talk about bullying when we talk about school. We can talk about homelessness when we talk about house. And we can talk about ecotourism when we're talking about vacations and travel. And so thinking about how we can bring that real world relevance in. And so what I challenge you to do is sketch out some of your course themes after today's webinar and play around with how can I make it more real world. So here's what I usually do. Here's how I can amp up the relevance and the context for the themes that I teach. And so I'm challenging you to kind of sketch that out and see what you can come up with. Okay. I just got a weird message there. Okay. So when we're talking about context, I want to talk about worksheets. Before proficiency-based instruction, we had students do a lot of memorizing. and they would fill in blanks, right? And the problem with that is that we were rewarding kids who are good memorizers, but they weren't necessarily showing me they can use it in a real world situation. So that's what we mean by contextualizing things, is that I don't want students to do what I call learn words in the air. So they're disconnected things that I'm just being taught, but there's no context that's pulling it down to the ground and showing me, okay, this is why we're talking about this. And so let's start by talking about vocabulary and how we teach vocabulary. And so what we know is that students need comprehensible input, right? So we all know about comprehensible input. And the whole idea is that I'm giving students a message they want to hear, and that they are able to then use the language they're learning on their own, right? And so that's a very, many of us have learned this from way back in our first methods classes, right? But what we want to pay attention to is it says long lists of vocabulary words that don't have any personal relevance and don't resonate with the topic they care about are actually blocked by their brain. And so I want us to realize that just learning a whole bunch of words isn't giving me that connection. And remember my little girl with her bubble, she's saying, how am I going to use this? Why am I learning this? And so what can I do about making it more relevant? So true confessions, many of us used to or may still teach vocabulary where we show a PowerPoint and we have a slide that says jacket, and we have a slide that says skirt, and we have a slide that says gloves or mittens. That is not in context, right? And remember what I said, words in the air. This is just learning separate ideas without having a situation or scenario with it. And so what I'm challenging you to do is move from this kind of idea to making it more relevant for your students. So when we're thinking about it, I want you to think about 3 ideas: content, context, and connections. The content, we know we're going to try to chunk, we're using visuals and gestures, we're pausing so students can process, we're checking for understanding. In the context, I want you to consider telling a story. I want you to consider offering a real world problem or challenge or some sort of scenario. And then when I'm thinking about the connections I'm making for students, am I personalizing it? Is it relevant to them? And is it connected to other learning that they've done? So I want you to remember those 3 C's. What's the actual content I'm teaching? What is the context? And how am I making the connections? How am I doing the connect part of that? So one way to think about that is to set a scene. So a great way to approach this is to ask students for advice about something. So for example, okay, I'm leaving for a trip over winter break. I'm going to be gone 10 days. I need your help. What do you think I should pack? Right? And I've got an actual suitcase sitting there. I'm going for 10 days. So how many pairs of pants do you think I should take? How many shirts should I take? How many pairs of socks should I take? Now we're learning the vocabulary of clothing, but in the context of helping me pack, right? I'm in a store and I need help from the person working at the store, the employee. I need their help to help me pick out a gift for my mother, my friend, whoever. And I'm going to describe the person I'm buying the gift for, and they're going to help me decide what gift I need. And so again, that's a real world scenario. That is a possible situation that our students would be in. So always think about it. The way I can generate them very quickly is say, can you help me with this? Right? So you're asking the students to be along with you when you're doing this instead of you giving things to them, right? Which is very teacher focused. We're trying to flip it and make it more student focused. So on my website, and I'm going to show you what page you can find it, I've just created this quick reference card called Language Input Quick Reference. And it's all about, think about the context. And then some of the other things we've done before, like question stems, and you all know these things, like using visuals and manipulatives, using scaffolded questions. How do I engage students with the new words and phrases? Because I'm having them say, turn to a partner and say this, ask your partner this, etc. But the part I want you to focus in on is the context box that I've added to the quick reference card. And so on my website, on the page called Target Language, you can download that card if you're interested. So just write yourself a note to go on grandforlang.com, and I want you to look for the page called Target Language, and you can download that quick reference card there. So let's play around with this a little bit. So I want you to imagine, I'm going to show you some themes, and I want us to think about what would be some real world scenarios that I would use? What's the situation? What do I need from the students when I teach this new vocabulary? So here's one on food and beverage. So these are ideas that teachers have put on in previous webinars that I've done. And so take a look. It's like, my family and I are embracing a vegan lifestyle. Let's plan our first vegan menu for the week. Can you help me with that? Okay, what do you think we should put in the menu? So that students are activated now to want to be part of the conversation instead of me telling, right? I'm hosting a cookout for friends. Will you please help me plan my shopping list? What should I buy if I'm having a cookout? What do you like, right? And so again, let them tell you. I'm hosting a traditional cuisine from Spanish-speaking countries. Oh, that looks like it needs something like a meal with traditional cuisine. Can you please help me find and shop for the best traditional plates and ingredients, right? So I'm thinking about, will you help me? Because I'm trying to plan this thing. I'm trying to do this thing. Clothing. I'm invited to celebrate my best friend's quinceañera that will take place in Oaxaca, Mexico, but I'm not sure what I should pack. Can you give me some ideas about what I should pack? And then that's how I'm teaching the new vocabulary. My luggage with all my clothes on my trip to Argentina did not make it. I need to go to the department store and replace my wardrobe for 2 weeks. What should I get? And again, that's how I'm teaching the vocabulary. Family and friends. We're hosting a family reunion. I need help for how to show the family relationships. Who's related to whom in my family? Like creating name badges or something like that. Who needs to sit next to whom at the tables when I'm setting up for a graduation party? The guests will be family and friends of the graduate. So I'm going to describe to you what they're like, and you're going to help me seat them at the table. So again, that's a possible real world situation. So what I want you to do now is think about a theme you're going to teach. And again, if you want to do this on a scratchy piece of paper and a sticky note, write down the theme. And I want you to think about ways the students would feel involved in the presentation of the new vocabulary and language chunks. Instead of being told things, they're actually involved in helping you in some way, giving you advice in some way, helping you seek a solution in some way. So let me pause for a second and give you some time to think about it. Okay, so now I'm going to ask a brave soul to volunteer to turn on their mic and tell me an idea that just popped into their head that was inspired by some of the ideas I just shared with you. And I'm practicing wait time. Go.
I'd like to go. Yeah, sorry, I'm not camera ready today.
It's okay.
What popped into my head was telling them that they are introducing a new student to the school and they want to help them find a dynamic group of friends that they would feel comfortable with. So they would have to point out the friends from a distance and describe the quality of the different people that they're going to introduce them to, in the next step. So they would need to, say the personality traits and like they look at that girl that she looks like this, etc. You know, that is so and so.
Yep.
So on and so on.
So the only caveat I have about that idea is of my 27 years in the classroom, 21 were in middle school. And if I allowed kids to describe other classmates to each other, they may not always be kind. And so I would make sure that
Well,
there
it
were
would be
some,
imaginary,
yeah,
like not our school, like a, you know, a
sure.
different, you know, a made up scenario. Yeah.
So I would
Definitely
just make
agree.
sure I normed that with them, that we're, you know, only going to say the best things about each other, et cetera.
Great.
Anybody
Hi,
else?
Leslie, this is Laura.
Hi.
Hi, I have an idea. You tell me if it's good or not. About like with clothing, I guess, just descriptions, clothing. Let's just say you're meeting your friend at like a really big crowded concert, and you have to somehow your friend calls you on the cell phone. You have to describe where you are and what you're wearing.
So that actually, I think, would make a great formative performance task, right? So this, what we're talking about now is how you would introduce the clothing, but I love that as a task. Saying, okay, now here's your task. And
Okay.
what are they doing through that task? They're showing you they know how to say the clothing words, right?
Right.
And so I love that. That's a real world situation. How am I going to find you in the crowd, right?
Yeah.
Because it'll be too loud to hear you won't hear my phone ring. So just tell me what you're going to be wearing and I'll find you, right? And so that's a great real world scenario. I like that, Laura.
Okay. Thanks.
Anybody else?
Leslie, it occurs to me, this is Charlotte, I teach at community college, and we actually have a food bank on campus. And it
Oh,
suddenly occurred to me, following up on what you were saying, if I said we're going to have a drive for the food bank, what do you think we really need to get in there, either with the holidays coming or for a busy time at the beginning of the school year, and have students generate the kind of good food to put in the food bank?
I love it. And also that has that whole social aspect, right?
Exactly.
The whole idea about hunger and helping others and empathy and all that. I love it. All right. So I hope I got your juices going on that a little bit, guys. Now, what if I want to use authentic resources for a context? And those of you who know me know you're not going to get away without me talking about authentic resources. So what if I teach vocabulary by using authentic resources? So take a look on the left of the screen here. This is an infographic about, it was a survey done in Mexico about how people spend their free time. What if I taught free time activities by using this authentic resource? Because not only does it have numbers and pictures, it has pictures down the side that depict the things on the left too. So it's very graphic. And instead of just learning computer, television, we can talk about more people like this. 13% said this, right? So there's a real world context for learning the free time activities expressions. And so again, how could I leverage this in terms of introducing initially the vocabulary? Now, you may want to cover up the words initially and teach them and then uncover them as you're teaching them. I mean, you can choose all kinds of different strategies with this. On the right-hand side is an infographic about a famous soccer player, and it's all the parts of his body he has injured. What a great way to learn parts of the body. It's now contextualized by talking about a famous soccer player. And you're still going to get the head and the legs and the arms and the knees and all those things in there, their feet. But we're now learning it in a context instead of looking at a little gingerbread outline that says head, nose, mouth. Now I'm able to do it in the context of a real live person. And guess what? Soccer players get hurt. Here's two more examples. On the left-hand side is an infographic in German that talks about occupations or careers. And which careers or occupations do people trust the most? And so notice that most of these occupations in the green have some sort of icon or picture with them that describe what they mean. And so you'll see that 96% trust the firefighters and the ambulance drivers and the nurses and the pharmacists, et cetera. Don't worry, we're on there. We're at 82%. We're tied with the police there towards the bottom of the green. And if you can see way down at the bottom, what got the lowest score of 14%? Politicians, exactly. So again, lots of pictures, lots of cognates. What a cool way to teach careers. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see an infographic called Travel Like a Pro. And it's like an example I gave you earlier, where it's giving you advice about what you should pack for a trip. And so it says 5 pairs of underwear, 5 pairs of socks, 4 shirts, 3 pairs of pants. Think about how contextualizing this helps students want to know what the clothing means, because they're reading about how to pack. So the context is packing for a trip. If I'm creating activities for my students to do in context, if I were to create an info gap activity, one idea would be to cover up 2 places on the infographic on one version and cover up 2 different sections on the other. And now I'm asking my friend, what can my dog eat that people can eat, right? And we know that they can't eat chocolate and things like that, but what can they eat? And so how can I contextualize that information gap activity to be about an authentic resource? And this can be used with elementary level kids because it's very simple. They're just saying the names of the foods that are allowed in the different categories. When I look at authentic text that has 2 sides, I automatically think of an info gap activity. So when I see one, I think, oh, one person A knows about the left side, person B knows about the right side, and I have to ask my friend about what is on their side. So the one on the left is in Spanish about the way backpacks used to be and the way backpacks are today. The one in the center is in German, what people buy their moms for Mother's Day and their dads for Father's Day. And then the one on the right in French is how much does it cost to have a cat versus a dog? And so again, when you see things that are 2-sided, contextualize their exchange by using an authentic resource. Oops. When I see things that I can divide into sections, my mind usually goes to jigsaw. And so when I want to have students talk in, for example, small groups in a small group activity, I look at authentic resources as the context. You see on the left, there's 3 different young people being described. I imagine cutting that up. One group has the first person, one group has the girl in the middle, one group has the person on the right, and then they come together and compare and contrast the people that they read about. And then on the right-hand side, you see this infographic that has information about why people volunteer, right? Why they give. And so it's divided into why, where, and how often. And so immediately my mind goes to jigsaw. I have one group explore the whys, one group explore the wheres, one group explore the how offens, and then we get together and share what we've learned. And so that can be the context for a small group activity. I also can use strategies like Placemat. And if you're not familiar with Placemat, it's basically a square in the middle and then lines drawn out to the corners. Each person has one section of the Placemat that is theirs. So you stick a authentic resource in the center, and then I make notes in my section of the outside of the Placemat. So imagine kids sitting in 4s. And then once we've had time to write down some things we learned, now we talk about what we've learned. And so again, a great cooperative learning strategy in small groups. What if I want to offer students different challenge levels, but I want it to be contextualized? Well, I can search for more than one version of an infographic, for example, here on the exact same topic. So these are 3 infographics that are all about colors of fruits and vegetables and why they're good for you. So why it's good to eat green things and purple things, etc. Notice on the right-hand side, I have a generic graphic organizer that goes with this, because all three of them are about the same thing. It's just that some of them are heavier on text and some are lighter on text and more visual for my learners that need that support. And so I'm going to give the one that's heavier on text, which is the one on the far right, to my students that need the challenge, whereas I might give my students that need support the one on the far left. But notice how they all can fill in the colors and the names of the fruits and vegetables and why they're good for you on all three. But I've just offered a variety of challenge levels for my students that need to be challenged. And I'm always thinking about my advanced learners who are sitting there doing everything I give them to do really fast and they didn't really have to think very hard. That's when we do things like tiering, right? Notice how on this form, this is a generic form we created in our district where we put a chart or a Venn diagram or some kind of graphic at the top. And then part 2 is always new words I learned that I'm putting in my personal dictionary. And then the last section is always what I think this is about. Here's a summary of what I think I just read about. And so all we would do, we'd switch out that first part. I can also contextualize learning by using a video. So this video happens to be called What is a Family? And I decided that I want this to be tiered by difficulty level again, like the one I just showed you, but that one was a tiered text. This one is a tiered task. And notice how the one on the bottom right is the lowest level of challenge because I've given them the words they can use right beside the questions. The one on the bottom left is the medium challenge because I've given them a word bank, but they don't know where they exactly would be used. And then the one on the top right is the one that is the highest level because there is no word bank. And so there's varying levels of support on these tasks, and they're all contextualized through the use of an authentic video. What if I want to make learning centers that are in context? Well, I can use authentic resources. And notice here, here's a speaking center, a listening center, a reading center, and a writing center that are all based on contextualized by looking at authentic resources. So for the speaking center, there's 2 infographics. For the one on the top right, for the listening, that's a song. For the one on the bottom left, that's a commercial. And on the bottom right are 2 meme kind of quote type visuals. And so notice how I didn't have to make up scenarios for each of those centers, but I was able to base them on real world, like authentic resources. By the way, this set of centers, along with several others, I've fully loaded up onto my website called on a page called Learning Centers, and the teachers gave me permission to share their centers. And so if you're interested in seeing those, check them out. What if I want to make choice boards? Well, instead of just saying, draw a picture, do this, do that, what if it's contextualized using authentic resources? And you'll see here, this is a series of resources on the topic of winter and what people do and wear in the winter. And notice that there's Instagram posts, there's an infographic, there's a word cloud, there's a video. They're all the context for whatever students are choosing from the choice board, whether that might be for homework, for independent work, like however you're using the choice boards in your classroom. And there's another example of a choice board there based on authentic resources. Now, something that's really popular right now is something called a playlist. So playlists actually come out of concurrent instruction, but are something you can use with any students. So they're not exactly a choice board because you're supposed to do these activities in order. So you first do the first task, and then you do the next one, and then the next one, and then it culminates with the final task, which you can see on this one happens to be a Flipgrid video. And so they accumulate information by interacting with all of these different authentic resources and context. They create a storyboard and then create a public service announcement. So you'll see at the top, there's a scenario. And then I've given them listening and viewing activities, reading activities, writing activities, and speaking activities throughout the list. And so they would do the first task the first night, they do the second task the second night, and it accumulates on each other. So they're collecting information they've learned to be able to do the final task. So what are some other task types I could use and authentic resources as the context? I could design lesson hooks around authentic scenarios or authentic resources. My performance assessments, parent small group work, which we saw a little bit of, free speaking or writing prompts using authentic resources as the context. Guided instruction, I'm modeling or I'm doing examples with students that I am using I'm using authentic resources as the context for those segments. They could be the basis for a student discussion. And then of course, I can also use authentic resources to teach grammar in context. So that'll be our next little segment. And I'm watching my time, Michael and Margarita, don't worry. So let's talk about grammar and context using the context of authentic resources. So here you'll see a series of tweets that all have to do with the comparative in Spanish. And so these are tweets people really tweeted. So these are real, they're not made up. And I put into Twitter, peor, or más que, menos que, and these popped up. Now, did all the ones that popped up, were all of them appropriate to use with students? No, they were not. And so these are the ones that I've clipped and put in a stack together. Notice how if I showed this alone to students, they could start drawing some conclusions about how the comparative is formed, because they're going to notice that it says peores and the word is palabras. Oh, so that has to do with that, right? And so literally they could mark this up and do a kind of discovery model where they're trying to figure out how the comparative works. Here's an example again in Spanish where I put into Twitter, when I was a child, I thought that, and all of the answers come up in the imperfect tense. And so that's how I generated the imperfect. And there's all kinds of fun things here. So the top one says, when I was a child, I thought that English was Spanish written backwards, right? That's a cool thing. I thought that the people in the TV could see me, right? I thought there was a person inside the ATM machine, right? So these are fun to read and think about how students would be engaged with this because it's a real world context. So it's not a worksheet where they're filling in verbs. It's something real people tweeted that now I'm going to look at and say, oh, how does that work? For French, I put in quand j'étais enfant or quand j'étais petit, when I was little. And again, they come up with cool things. So this tower here, this is, I thought this was the Eiffel Tower, right? And so it's just silly things. I used to call the circumflex accent a Chinese hat. I thought there were monsters under my bed. I thought, right? People are telling real world situations here that contextualize the grammar for the students. Now, sometimes you want to grab the pictures that come with social media because they help tell part of the story. And so on this collage here, you're going to find several posts on Twitter and Instagram, but I put them together in a format like this because I wanted to keep the pictures with them, right? So the first one on the left says, frankly, I doubt that William Shatner knows how to sing. These are all subjunctive. And it's because I put into social media hashtag dudoke, I doubt that, and a whole bunch of posts were generated that had the subjunctive in them. So here are some examples of things I've put into social media to get these grammar and context examples. If I was rich, if I had a lot of money, I would like to, right? And that's going to just generate a lot of infinitives pretty much. So when you think about a particular grammar point you're looking for, I want you to consider what are some key words you might use to get it to come up. And so I want you to think, okay, I'm getting ready to start this grammar point. What keywords might generate posts for me that I can use as a real world context for talking about the grammar? So if you are interested, oh, one more thing. I also have collected memes. And so on one collage page, I've put a whole bunch of memes that all have the exact same grammar point shown. So for my French teachers in the group, all of these show the future tense. And they're so much fun. The one in the bottom center says, one day I will be a unicorn. The one on the bottom right says, give us the sausages and nobody will get hurt, right? And so they're just fun things, but something I could do, print out, laminate. I'm a big laminator, and have the kids mark them up and say, oh, how is that formed? How is that? Wow. Okay, let me see if I can figure out how the future tense works. Here's an example in German. And it has all the thes, right? Die, das, der. And here's one for Spanish. All of these have the imperfect tense in them. And so interesting to kids, engaging because they're funny, right? Usually memes are pretty funny. And then I'm also having them focus in on, well, let's see if we can figure out what this grammar point's about, but using it with the context of the authentic resources. So if you're interested, I have collected already tons of these already for you. And so if you go to my page called Grammar and Context and you scroll down, this is just a screenshot of the beginning of the meme collages for French. And you see I have conditional, future, just keep scrolling down. There's lots and lots of them there. And so if you're interested in taking a look at those, so you don't have to come up with them on your own, I also have social media posts under the different grammar points as well. So please feel free to use those as a jumping off point and then start looking for some on your own. Okay, so what I want us to do next is just think about, okay, so what are you going to do with all this information I just gave you about contextualizing learning for students? So we talked about our Generation Z learners. We talked about the importance of relevance and finding out what interests students about what we're teaching, right? And then we started thinking about how could I make some real world scenarios that would involve students when I teach new vocabulary and language chunks? Then what are some authentic resources I can use for a variety of purposes to provide context to all different task types? And then the final part of our journey together today was all about grammar and context. And how can I use authentic resources like memes and social media posts to provide a context for students to understand how grammar works? And so believe it or not, we just did that in only 40-some minutes. All right, so what I'd love to do now is I've allowed some time at the end for questions. And my friends, Mike and Margarita are going to help me out with this. So if you have any questions, I'm ready for you. So we have a few minutes here that we can do questions.
You can type your question in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask your question, we have time for a few. A lot of thank yous are in the chat, Leslie, as people
Okay.
are, just so you know what's going on.
Any questions?
Hi, Leslie. This is Laura.
Okay.
Hi. I'll just ask a question because I don't know. I know you get a lot of your authentic resources from Twitter and from Pinterest. I was just wondering if there's anywhere else you look for authentic resources.
So I think I do a lot of the searching for Pinterest for what I what I pin on Pinterest, because I have so many boards at this point, almost 200, they'll start suggesting things to me, or I'll see things out on Twitter and I'll pin them over. And so now that my boards are already pretty much set, I just start adding and adding. When I'm looking for contextualized things, I am looking for things like that are printed so that I can screenshot them. And by the way, there isn't a attribution issue with social media posts. People have put that out in the universe for anybody to see. And you're also theoretically giving them credit because their Twitter handle is there. Oh, FYI, look at people's Twitter handles too to make sure they're appropriate. So anyway, I've had to do that. So for me, it's about having as many different text types as possible for students to interact with, so that as we're moving them up the levels where they're trying to get into like intermediate high, things like that, we want to make sure that students feel confident, because from the very beginning, we've been exposing them to these little chunks of text along the way. And so that's why I love social media. Plus, kids love social media. And so that's a huge hook for them. Sally, when you're discovery, do you compile a list or you work with the students? Oh, so this is a great question. So a lot of people are putting into their curricula lately the priority vocabulary. So that's the vocabulary that everyone who teaches the course kind of agrees on. And then they have a list of student generated vocabulary. So what students want to talk about. And so that can be a separate list you create with that class. I would try to not allow that thing to get too out of hand because it'll be too many words. But what we know is if students are given the words and the phrases they want to be able to use to express themselves, they will use them, right? And so that's the plus side, is that it will make me want to. And so you can just document them by adding them to a list, adding them to your website, whatever you want. Kids could maybe vote on them. You could do a Google form, like to survey kids about what they want to be able to say. I mean, the typical thing, think back when we were using textbooks and they would talk about classes, and the classes that students learn, the classes they have, did not match the schedules we had at our school. So we'd had to teach them how to say home economics and industrial arts and things like that. Well, the same thing is true now. Students are interested in free time activities and things having to do with technology that aren't on these lists. And so we want to make sure we give them the words that will make them want to express using the language, because that's the end result, right? We want them to be able to communicate with what they've learned.
So there was a question on how do you engage students on cultural topics that they're not familiar with? And I think part of that means, how do they know what they want to know?
Yep. And so I think that when we ask them about what do you want to learn about schools in general, I think that they can generate that. I want us to remember that when we contextualize things around authentic resources, the culture will come through because it's authentic. And that's what's important. You will notice that if you're talking about schools and you pull up an actual school schedule of a student somewhere in the target language country, it's not going to look like a schedule here. And so then we start talking about, well, what does that say about us versus how their schedules look? What does it say about what they value? Oh, this person has to take 3 foreign languages. What does that say about what they value in their culture, right? And so that's where the cultural conversations can come from. So I don't really think it's not as much about generating questions about the culture. That will happen when we actually start talking about culture, I think. And so initially, I think it's more about what do you want to be able to talk about around this topic?
So Leslie,
Okay.
it's 4:59, so I want to respect everyone's time. If there were some other questions in the chat, can I encourage people to reach out to you through your contact if they want to follow up?
Sure. And if you know that I'm Gran Forlang on Pinterest, I'm Gran Forlang on Twitter, and my website is granforlang.com. You can guess what my email address is, right? So granforlang@gmail.com. Thank you all so much for attending. Mike has just a few extra things to tell you.
So thank you, Leslie, for your excellent presentation as always, and for Margarita for moderating. As I mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, this has been recorded, and the recording will be made available likely tomorrow on our website, necfl.org, as well as our YouTube channel. New York State teachers who need proof of attendance for CTLE credit, please use the links provided at necfl.org/virtual. Teachers in other states may use the same links. Please consult your local district or state regulations regarding documented PD hours. If you haven't yet, please register now to attend the 2022 Northeast Conference in New York City live in person. This year's theme, Classroom Roots, Global Reach, is sure to generate interesting discussions. The complete preliminary program registration information are available at necfl.org/conference. On behalf of the NECFL Conference Board of Directors, thank you for attending this workshop and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. See you in New York, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for
Goodbye.
coming.